Welcome to the studio at Moggahanger Park. We are here to tell the story of Britain's heritage and explore the challenges we all face today and in the future. I'm joined by Peter Smith, who is the chairman of the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, Evangelicals, and their chief administrative officer to the United Nations and also for the International Life Federation. Peter, we are thrilled that you've managed to make it up here to the Moggahanger Park Centre, and in particular because this house was built by a family who were part of the Wilberforce sect or group from Clapham, and Henry Thornton was with William Wilberforce on Clapham Common when they determined upon, recorded in Wilberforce's diary, the reformation of manners and the abolition of the North Atlantic slave trade. And I know that it's a subject that you find connects very closely to the protection of the unborn. So I'd like you just to talk a little bit about that connection, and then we'll talk about wider issues.
Yes, I'm a great fan of Wilberforce, and I've studied his life in some detail, and I'm amazed that a man in very poor health, but by the grace of God was able to abolish slavery in the world. And after the abolition of the North Atlantic slave trade, he helped get a little amendment to some legislation that allowed the Royal Navy to board any ship suspected of carrying slaves, and if slaves were found they could impound the ship, and those good sailors got a share of the prize money. And when you give the good men of the Royal Navy such fine work to do, with a reward at the end, it's amazing how good the results are. And really, that kind of open slave trade doesn't exist now. There are other kinds of slave trade now, trafficking in persons, but it's totally different to the slave markets where they had men and women in chains and sold them off like chattels.
But it's the commonality is the exploitation of the most vulnerable.
Yes, and the parallels between justifying slavery and justifying abortion are very similar. And we've produced a little leaflet, Who Will Be the Next Wilberforce, which we copied from a Canadian leaflet, a very similar one. And there are many parallels. You see, the black African was considered not one of us when there was a census done in the southern states of America. A black man was 2/3 of a white man, and so forth. And there are all sorts of ways of dehumanising these people, the same as the unborn child is dehumanised, the same way as the Nazis dehumanised various people who were at odds with them. The Jewish people were dehumanised, the Gypsies, the Slavs, subhuman, half human, or not one of us. And if you wish to treat a group of people badly, the first thing you do is dehumanise them, and you somehow make them not us. They're inferior to us, or they're a threat to us, or they're something, and they're detrimental in some way, so we need to get rid of them.
So they're not babies, for instance. They're not babies in the womb. They're only babies out of the womb.
Well, and out of the womb, and wanted even at that point. Some are even now talking of after-birth abortion. They don't like to use the term infanticide, so they would say after-birth abortion. But people don't fall for that one because you can see the child. The development of the ultrasound machine has been a great ally to us, because most people have now seen an ultrasound picture of their baby or their grandchild, and it's never not a child. When Kate was pregnant, they never talked about Prince George as a fetus. this was always an heir to the throne, and there was never any discussion about. And currently, with her pregnancy,
it's quite important to determine whether he was a boy or a girl.
Well,
because they were changing the sort of hereditary rights.
So this child now she's carrying is another heir to the throne, and will never be diminished by people, which is good.
Now, folks would have noticed that I mentioned that you're an evangelical, yes. And Wilberforce was, a notable evangelical. Yes. What's the importance of being an evangelical in this fight? Where does that fit in?
Well, see, in the 60s, when the pro-abortionists were getting ready to change the law, in the United States, we hear this from Dr. Bernard Nathanson, that there was a plan drawn up as to how to not get the evangelicals in America to fight the issue on abortion, so they just came up with, it's a Catholic issue. So that then would sort of contaminate it so that the evangelicals would draw away, this is a Catholic issue, you see. It's a very clever ploy.
Is there an element that you basically have to educate evangelicals on this issue?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember preaching up in the Outer Hebrides one time in Stornoway, and some woman yelled at me after the service that I was a Catholic or something, and I said, I'm not a Roman Catholic, I'm an evangelical. I got saved at a barbecue in Australia when I was 30. Hardly ever went to any sort of church, and definitely not a Catholic church.
One of the key features of the campaign with William Wilberforce entailed, I suppose, shocking people into the reality of the way the slaves were treated. And you've mentioned in this leaflet about Thomas Clarkson, yes. And folks will remember that, the Amazing Grace film,
yes.
Where people were sort of holding their noses,
yes.
When he forced them to see the reality. Is that an important element of the pro-life campaign? Yes,
we have a presentation we do in schools in Britain, and I've taught it in other countries around the world, where we show pictures of the unborn child and we show pictures of aborted babies. Now, some groups hold the pictures up outside the abortion clinics. We're not so in favour of that, but we show it to children in high schools. And when young people see those pictures, it's extremely difficult for them to say, this isn't a human being. And this little fetal model, I showed that to the Philippines ambassador and his wife earlier this year at a dinner they came to that I had. And they gasped when they saw it, because they're taught, well, there's nothing there, but that's a baby. I show this little model to little 2-year-olds in church. I say, what's this? And they all say, it's a baby. Children understand it's a baby.
How many weeks?
10 weeks from conception.
Wow.
Now
and that's a life size?
Yes, that's a 1-to-1 scale. Yep. Now you have a heartbeat at 3 weeks from conception. From 6 days you're attached to your mother's womb here, and you're getting oxygen. Now some people naively think you don't get a soul until you're born, and you breathe in the breath of life, as Adam did. God breathed into him the breath of life. But you're getting the oxygen from your mother across the umbilical cord, otherwise you couldn't live. So people are incredibly ignorant about the development of the child in the womb, and some people wish to be ignorant about it. We have no informed consent laws in this country for abortion. Women are intentionally not told anything. They're not told anything about the risks to their own health. They're not told about the development of their child. Nothing. Now, if you have a heart operation, you're told every detail. If you're getting a valve replaced, they show you how the valve is, what it looks like they're going to put in you. If you have a bypass, they show you where they'll pull the veins out of your leg and bypass the blockage. If you're having a stent, they'll show you how all that works, and you're told all the positive benefits and you're told the negatives. You might die, or you might whatever, which is appropriate. So you can decide, well, do I have this procedure or not? But with abortion, nothing's told.
Isn't there a sort of a more sinister aspect in that they are, because it has become such a polarised sort of ideological divide, women, young especially, are encouraged, and linking it back to, let's say, the slave trade, but certainly not on the same commercial scale, there is an economic aspect to it as well. Oh, yes. So people are in the business of promoting it, oh, yes. Far from actually giving a balanced health report on it. They're actually in the business.
A suction abortion probably takes 5 minutes, and you can charge £300 to £500. It's a lot of money. So there is a lot of money involved. Now, a lot of these groups, BPAS and Murray Stopes, they'll say we're charities, but the people running those get enormous salaries. Absolutely enormous salaries. Nothing like what I get. So there is money involved. Don't worry, there's money involved. There's lots of money involved. And you see, this is the linchpin of the radical feminist movement. And they believe they can only obtain true equality with men if they can behave in the most irresponsible way and have no consequences. They can walk away without a baby. And it's tragic that the women's rights movement is built upon the blood of their unborn children. That's literally what has happened. Now recently, a few days ago, there was a court case here that said that a heavy drinker can't be prosecuted because the baby's brain damaged from fetal alcohol syndrome. So the child in the womb has absolutely no protection. If you fed a child straight gin after it was born, you'd be locked up. But you can down a bottle of vodka a day through every day of pregnancy, have a brain damaged child, and nothing is done. Because you have to deny there's anyone there, and they're not important.
I wasn't aware of that case. Mm-hmm. One of the real issues, and what part of your role is for SPUC and the Federation of Life, is it? International Life Federation, yes. Is to lobby, to try and affect the law, because in one sense it's legalised in the same way as the slave trade was legalised, and so how do you go about it in this country and beyond to try and persuade legislators?
Well, at the moment we have a leafleting campaign. 97% of abortions are carried out on the...
Just read the front of that. Why can't every pregnancy have a happy ending? Question mark.
97% of abortions are authorised because it is claimed that pregnancy is a risk to women's mental health. Now, there was a study done in 2011, found that the mental health of women carrying unwanted pregnancies to term and having abortions was no different. Therefore, the 97% of abortions are illegal. Now, we all know that the 67 Abortion Act is a medical fiction. It claims that the baby's part of the mother, which is patently untrue. Half of them are boys and not girls, and only half the genetic material comes from the mother. But it's claimed it's just all one unit. And that there is meant to be some mental benefit for the woman to have the abortion. But it's not true.
Isn't the evidence to the contrary? That the damage is done by the act?
Yes, we have a group called Arch that counsels women who've had abortions, and we're overwhelmed with work. Care Confidential have the same thing. And the medical profession just close their eyes to it. They're not interested in those women.
You travel across to the US and you're involved in the UN. What I've heard about trends among legislators in the US is that there is a potential for the tide to be turned, and the Roe versus Wade is sort of starting to look less stable.
Well, Roe versus Wade was an incredible grab by the Supreme Court of the United States to override all the state legislatures. It's incredible. It's really an out-of-control court. It was never envisaged by the founding fathers that that court would do those things. At least our courts here don't do that. They don't legislate for us. The Supreme Court basically legislates for America. One woman was able to get prayers banned from all public schools. Awful things they've done. But the state legislatures have done things to have informed consent legislation, waiting periods, all sorts of things that have reduced the abortion rate. But there is incredible pressure at the United Nations from the US and Europe and Britain to push countries to legalise abortion. And it's crazy because it's suicide.
You travel over. What committees or forums are there within the UN that you can actually get a hearing?
Well, I have a UN pass, and SPUC got accredited in 1999. International Right to Life was accredited in 1987. I go to two committees where it's called the UN Committee, where they accredit groups that come to the UN. I go there and help good people get accredited. I go to the Commission on Status of Women each year. I go to Commission on Population and Development. That's the women's meeting's the third committee of the General Assembly, and the population meeting's the second committee. I've also been involved with when the International Criminal Court was set up, when the Disability Convention was negotiated. They were sixth committee, which is legal committee. And I know lots of people at the UN, lots of diplomats, ambassadors. And I say to them, oh, don't put that in, put this in.
Very good.
You know, and sometimes we'll have 200 people at the UN with our coalition. The other side will have 50 to 100 times that. The homosexuals are there in force. But that's okay. We're always polite to everybody, and we're always kind, and we're not nasty to people. And they tear their hair out, these people, when we're nice to them.
One of the historians look back at Wilberforce, and they say that he managed to hold together the ideals and being pragmatic. So he was practical and pragmatic, yes, as well as maintaining the principles.
Well, you see, I've made friends with the Chinese delegate at the UN. Now, they have an awful one-child policy and forced abortions, but it's amazing what a little friendship can do, and a lunch, and you be nice to each other, and you talk to each other, and you find you have some things in common. They're quite pro-family, things like that, and he's been helpful in some ways. The Russians are quite helpful now. They're very pro-family, and they're very concerned about their shrinking population in Russia. And there's very strong Christian Orthodox influence now in Russia. It's amazing to see the change in a very short number of years after the fall of communism. It's incredible. And you never know who of the other countries might be helpful. At one meeting, the Romanian delegate was with us. It was incredible. And the US was so taken aback, it took them 2 or 3 days for them to apply the pressure back to his capital to get him pulled off the delegation. But he was beautiful. He was wonderful. He was speaking up just exactly the way we wanted him to speak up. So you never know who God might give you in that forum who may speak up and be a thorn in the side of these people. The people say, do you have any effect? I say, well, I'm sort of like that little pebble under Goliath's heel, between his sandal and his heel. And when he's throwing the javelin, it just puts him off slightly, you see. It's like that.
There are other pebbles you could use.
Yes.
But, just to say, thank you very much for joining us on this programme. I'm here with Peter Smith, who is the chairman of the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children. Evangelicals. It's quite a mouthful, that is.
Yes,
Peter, for folks watching, we're talking about, protecting unborn children. What statistics off the top of your head are there for the UK and worldwide, so people can get a grasp of the scale of this tragedy?
Well, since 1968, when the Abortion Act came into power, legal abortion, there's been around 7 million abortions in the UK, around, a little over 200,000 a year. Worldwide it's 40 to 50 million, although that figure is extremely difficult to justify. But the abortion rate in the UK is about the same as the immigration rate. We abort around 200,000 a year and we get about 200,000 immigrants. Now, I'm an immigrant from Australia, so I'm not against immigration.
I'm an immigrant from heaven.
There you go.
I was going to ask, the other aspect which seems to be getting a lot of press at the moment is the gender selective abortions, which there are disputes in academia whether it is in fact statistically happening in the UK, but
I think there's very little doubt that certain groups have a son preference. You see, you don't hear the women's groups speak up about this. You don't hear the women's groups speak up about the women being forcibly aborted in China. I speak up better for the women of the world, because this is the most horrific human rights abuse you could contemplate. Aborting baby girls. What are the women's groups doing about it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because if they say any abortion is bad, they're afraid that it's the thin end of the wedge. So the same thing happened in America with partial birth abortion, where they sucked the baby's brains out. Really, the pro-abortionists tactically would have been better off to just give in on it. But they fought against a ban on partial birth abortion, but they lost eventually. Now, partial birth abortion is a horrendous thing. They don't tactically have any sense. You see, the politicians are terrified of the women's movement. They think these radical feminists represent all the women in Britain, and they don't. I have 2 daughters. One of them is very angry that the feminists have made it so that basically our system is you have to work full-time now. It's almost impossible to have more than 1 or 2 children and cope. And she would far rather, at the moment with 2 young children, be at home with them and be a full-time mother. But that option has been basically taken away from her.
We're seated in front of a backdrop of Westminster, the House of Parliament. There's an election in 2015. How should Christians vote? How should they scrutinise MPs' voting records? How can we, use our democratic mandate to change this scourge on our country?
Well, one thing you can do is look up SPUC's website. Just Google SPUC, you'll soon find it, SPUC. And we have voting records for politicians on the issue of abortion. Now, I firmly believe that if a woman, man or woman, MP, votes for abortion, they're disqualified as being a public representative. I don't believe they should be represented if they're in favour of that.
And is it because it's become an ideological issue that they're not going to change? Is there any way of actually changing the hearts of those who vote in such a way?
You see, in America, in many states of America, I've spoken to different representatives in Washington and they say, Peter, I couldn't get elected unless I was pro-life. If you're from Tennessee or Mississippi or any of those southern states, you can't get elected to any elected office unless you're pro-life. And sadly, we have not been able to achieve that here. But some countries have changed. Poland has changed. After the communists fell, they changed from
the influence of the Catholic Church.
Yes, and it was anti.
And
abortion was communist.
Away from atheism. I have communists as atheists.
Oh, I don't think there are ever many atheists in Poland. I don't think there were very many
I was
at
talking
all.
about Poland and the fact that
Poland?
the communist system
Was
is
atheistic.
founded on
Yes,
atheism and evolution.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they had a specific window of opportunity because the pro-life law was opposite to the communists. So it was presented as opposite to the communists. And it was a Catholic thing. And they got through a quite good pro-life law, and they have pro-life Supreme Court justices, and the communists have got back into power under a different guise, but they've not been able to change that law. It's tremendous. So things can change back the other way. See, who would have thought communism would have fallen? I can remember at Bible college praying for a Russian Christian rock band that had been imprisoned. I remember praying for Ceausescu to go from Romania, and whew, it happened. We would never have believed it. But those things happen. You never know. And you never know who God might use. He used Gideon. He was pathetic. He wasn't willing to do anything, you know. But mighty man of valour, the angel of the Lord says, and he's hopeless. But look what he achieved.
It's wonderful to end on a positive note.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I hope people didn't mind my throwaway line about being an immigrant from heaven. I'm more a refugee. But the scriptures say we're strangers, but we can still do a tremendous amount in this world. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Peter, for joining us.